Hey guys, welcome back. So you're joining me from a flight between Los Angeles, California and Austin, Texas. And currently I'm on the far southern border of New Mexico, and in fact, off the horizon here, I can see some of the mountains in northern Mexico. So last time we talked about automation. I'd like to just share a couple more thoughts with you about automation that should help you while you're doing the reading in the book. Today I'd like to talk about out-of-the-loop unfamiliarity. Out-of-the-loop unfamiliarity is when we remove ourselves from the control loop and we give full control and full power to the system, to the mechanical machine and the automation. And we remove ourselves from that loop, and there's a number of negative consequences that can result. So there's four different factors that can lead to out-of-the-loop unfamiliarity. The first one is complacency. We talked a little bit about complacency last time, but complacency is when you really over-trust the automation. I expect everything to go well with the automation right now. I'm on autopilot again. Now I'm flying 9,500 feet towards Austin, and it's very easy at times to just trust that the entire system is going to work together flawlessly. And if you get into that mental state, you remove yourself from the control loop. One of the things that is related to complacency is the idea of the generation effect. And the generation effect shows that if I actually made the command input, if I actually have a manual portion of that control in some way or another, then I maintain my interaction with it. I maintain my involvement with the system, and I can understand what's going on. It prevents complacency. That's one way to do it. And so related back to the levels and stages of automation that we talked about last time, if you're not completely automated, but somewhere in the middle, you maintain some type of involvement in the system, and that can result in better performance, especially when there's a failure of the system, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. So that's complacency. That's one factor that can result in out-of-the-loop unfamiliarity. The second one is automation bias. And for automation bias, I thought of an example with my GPS using a warning called the sink rate warning, and my GPS gives me a warning if I'm descending towards the ground too quickly. And I actually captured that during the approach to a small airport in southern Arizona to get fuel earlier today, and I'll go ahead and play that for you now. Alright, so I'm now 5 miles west outside of Auction Regional Airport, which is south of Phoenix. I'm in my descent, and I'm going to try to demonstrate for you automation bias, an example of that. Automation bias is when you get inaccurate decision advice from a computer, and you trust that computer's advice more than your own personal judgment. And one example of that is my sink rate warning you'll hear hopefully on approach. I'm going to try to come in really steep into landing at Auction, where I'm stopping for fuel. And you'll notice I'll be, relatively slow because I'll be in the pattern getting ready to land. And I'll be on a very steep approach angle. And then I'm going to try to get my GPS to tell me to pull up. And she'll say sink rate, pull up, pull up. Well, if you were to pull up on short final into an airport with relatively slow airspeed, that's a very bad situation that you don't want to be in. And so I'm going to try to demonstrate that. And it'll be an example of automation bias. However, I'm not going to demonstrate the bias. I'm going to try to trust my own judgment and not pull up and flare at the appropriate time. So let's see how this looks. Okay, so here I am setting up on a very steep approach into runway 4 at Auction, Arizona. I'm at pattern altitude, 80 knots on left base, very, very high, and I'm going to do a very steep approach. This is very normal, very good practice for flying in mountainous terrain like Colorado. Auction traffic, the white detail Bonanza is now turning final runway 4, full stop, Auction. Alright, so now I'm going to turn runway full. I'm going to bring the power to idle. I'm going to come in very, very steep to runway 4. I've got my gear down and locked. Gas.
Pull up.
There's the warning. Sink rate, pull up.
500.
Gas, undercarriage, mixture, prop power, I'm secure, white arc, flaps. Let's see if we can get her to say it again. Down and locked. Gas.
Pull up.
Okay, so I hope you found that relevant and interesting. So I thought that was a good example of automation bias. It's also a good example of automation mistrust. So over the years, I've flown with the same GPS, and I get that sink rate warning all the time. What do? I ignore it, frankly. It doesn't mean a lot to me, so that's a problem, because there could be a situation where I'm in a situation where the automation is trying to tell me about a sink rate that I may not be aware of. It could be downdrafts and weather. It could be mountain wave activity, something like that. And And if I ignore it, it's called the cry wolf effect, where the automation keeps telling me, your sync rate, pull up, pull up, pull up, pull up. Over time, I'm just going to start ignoring it. And you can see it didn't get much of an arousal out of me when I was on approach to that airport either. So that's an example of automation bias. The third factor that can lead to out-of-the-loop unfamiliarity or relates to it is situation awareness. And there's a chart in your book that shows the relationship between workload and situation awareness. And the assumption here is that if you have very, very high workload, the assumption is that you probably have a pretty relatively low level of automation. And if you have low level of automation associated with a high level of workload to a certain point, you could also, that will usually result in better SA, situation awareness, because you're involved in the system. You're making command inputs, you're perceiving things, you're manually controlling the system. And that can result in better situation awareness, relatively speaking. On the other end of that scale, on that chart, you'll find there's also very low levels of workload, and the assumption is that if you have a very, very low level of workload in an automated system, that would be indicative of a highly automated system, a high level like we talked about last time under various stages. Okay, so if you have very high level of automation, and very low workload, then the research shows us that you would, and that makes sense, that you would have relatively low situation awareness as well. And that's a problem when you need to recover from an emergency situation or when your automation fails. Okay, right now I'm relying on my autopilot to fly the airplane right now, and if the autopilot fails, then I may not have very good situation awareness about where I am and what I'm doing. And it gets back to the generation effect. If I flew the airplane to a VOR or a waypoint and I flew over that waypoint, I'm going to know a lot better about where I am in relationship to that waypoint compared to when I'm just sitting back with my arms crossed and I'm just waiting for the airplane to fly over a waypoint and make a turn and make a turn and make a turn. I may not have SA about my environment. I may not have good perception, comprehension, and projection about what I'm doing. Remember the 3 levels of SA, I hope. The fourth factor, and this one is not necessarily difficult to understand, but the idea is skill degradation. And the idea is that if I automate everything in a system and I rely on automation over and over again and remove myself from that control loop, it can result in out-of-the-loop unfamiliarity, because if the automation fails, or if I need to fly, in this case fly an airplane manually for some reason, my performance may be much worse. So, if I fly all day today on autopilot, I'm not going to have terribly detrimental effects. But if I fly on autopilot every day and every flight for many, many flights and maybe many, many years, like we're seeing in some highly automated aircraft these days, when we ask pilots to take manual control, they may not have the proficiency. And that's interesting, actually, regulation point, because there's no proficiency for how often we need to fly an airplane manually, according to the FAA. But if you do rely on automation 100% all the time, you could have some unfamiliarity with the system when you haven't manually flown it for, in some cases, many years or many sorties. And so my recommendation, and many pilots would recommend, that from time to time when you're doing practice, take the autopilot off and fly the thing manually, and make sure that you maintain all those skills, those piloting skills that you learned in pilot training. And it's good fun too. Okay, so fly the airplane manually, don't rely on automation all the time. That's especially true for complex maneuvers like instrument approaches and that kind of thing. All right, so that's the 4 factors that can contribute to out-of-the-loop unfamiliarity. And I hope that you found, again, this interesting. And this was a shorter video, but I hope that it helps you understanding some of the course content in the course books. I'm on my way to Austin. I'll be thinking of you, and I'll be back next week in class. We'll see you. Have a good day. Bye.